Welcome, brave soul. Tonight you will journey into the forgotten halls of Black Hollow Asylum. Beware, for not all who enter leave unscathed. The shadows whisper, the walls remember, and something dark still lingers within. Will you survive the curse that claims all who dare to listen?
We drove through the dense woods, the road leading us deeper into the forgotten corners of the town. Black Hollow Asylum loomed ahead, a decaying relic of madness. My friends Mark and Jacob laughed nervously, unaware of the true horror awaiting us inside. We stepped through the shattered gate, the rusted hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the asylum was eerily silent, except for the occasional creak of the floor beneath our feet. A cold breeze swept through the broken windows, carrying whispers from the past. Jacob glanced around, his flashlight flickering in the oppressive darkness. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered. Mark chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. But the weight of the asylum's history pressed down on us, a dark presence lurking in the shadows. We entered a long corridor, walls covered in peeling paint and forgotten memories. My heart raced as I noticed faint handprints smeared across the walls, as though someone, or something, had been clawing to escape. The air was thick with dread. Mark dared us to explore the upper floors, where the worst of the asylum's patients were once kept. The stairs creaked beneath our weight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Something was waiting for us in the dark. As we reached the top floor, the temperature dropped. Our breath fogged in the cold air, and the silence was broken by a distant, eerie moan. Jacob froze, his eyes wide with terror. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Before we could answer, a door at the end of the hallway slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound echoed through the empty asylum, and we stood frozen in place, unsure whether to run or investigate. The darkness seemed to swallow us whole. The hallway stretched before us, endless and suffocating. Shadows danced along the walls, taking on twisted, nightmarish shapes. Mark took a step forward, flashlight shaking in his grip. "Let's check it out," he muttered, his voice hollow. The door we had heard slam was now slightly ajar. Cold, pale light filtered through the crack, illuminating the dust motes floating in the air. I exchanged a nervous glance with Jacob. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but curiosity won. Pushing the door open, we stepped inside. The room was filled with old medical equipment, rusted and forgotten. A strange symbol was etched into the floor, dark stains surrounding it. I felt a chill crawl down my spine as I realized what it was. This place. "It's cursed," Jacob whispered, his voice barely audible. Mark knelt down, studying the symbol. "I've seen this before," he said slowly. "It's a mark of suffering, used in rituals." His words hung heavy in the stale air. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted even further. My flashlight flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. Jacob let out a sharp gasp as we heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching us from the hallway. But we were alone. The door creaked open, revealing a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. Its form was barely visible, more of a dark silhouette than a person. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized we had disturbed something ancient, something malevolent. Without warning, the figure rushed toward us, its presence suffocating. I felt a cold hand brush my arm, and I screamed, stumbling backward. Mark and Jacob were already running, terror etched on their faces. We had to escape, but the asylum wouldn't let us go so easily. We ran through the darkened corridors, the sound of our footsteps echoing loudly. Every corner we turned, I felt the asylum tightening its grip on us. Mark shouted from up ahead, "This way!" His voice barely cut through the oppressive air. We stumbled into what appeared to be a basement entrance. It was unmarked and hidden behind a rotting door. "We'll be safer down here," Mark said, but I knew he didn't believe his own words. Descending the stairs, the air grew colder, the silence heavier. The basement was a maze of narrow passageways, each more claustrophobic than the last. As we moved further in, I could feel the weight of the asylum's past pressing down on us. Mark's flashlight flickered, casting distorted shadows that looked like grasping hands. Jacob lagged behind, his breath coming in sharp gasps. "Something's wrong," he whispered. "I feel like we're being followed." I turned to look back and my heart nearly stopped. A figure stood at the top of the stairs, watching us with hollow eyes. The figure didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. "We need to keep going," Mark urged, pulling Jacob forward. I took one last glance at the figure before following. The darkness ahead felt alive, as if the asylum itself was swallowing us whole. We found a small room, cluttered with old papers and broken furniture. Mark slammed the door behind us and we huddled together, our breaths ragged. "We need to figure out a way out of here," he said, his voice trembling. But I knew we were trapped. The sound of whispering voices filled the air, growing louder and more insistent. They spoke of pain, of suffering, of death. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness pressing against us from all sides. There was no escape from Black Hollow Asylum. The whispers continued, wrapping around us like invisible chains. Mark fumbled with his phone, but there was no signal. "We're trapped," Jacob whispered, his eyes wide with terror. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The asylum wanted us here. The lights in the room flickered, casting strange shadows across the walls. In the dim light, I saw something moving in the corner, a figure hunched over, watching us. I blinked, and it was gone. But the feeling of being watched remained. Suddenly, the door burst open with a violent force. The figure from before stood there, its eyes burning with hatred. "Get out!" it screeched, its voice echoing through the room. But we couldn't move. Our bodies were frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. Mark was the first to snap out of it. He grabbed a nearby chair and swung it at the figure, but it passed right through it as if it weren't there. The figure let out a blood-curdling scream, and the room seemed to shake. The asylum itself was angry. The walls began to crack, dust and debris falling from the ceiling. "We need to get out now," Mark shouted, pulling us toward the door. But the figure blocked our path, its cold, dead eyes locked onto us. There was no escaping its wrath. We ran, stumbling through the crumbling hallways. The asylum seemed to shift and change around us, turning into a nightmarish maze. Every turn led us deeper into the heart of its darkness. The whispers grew louder, more aggressive, demanding our souls. Jacob tripped and fell, his screams echoing through the asylum. When I turned to help him, the figure was already there, its hands gripping his shoulders. I watched in horror as Jacob was dragged into the darkness, his screams fading into silence. There was nothing we could do. Mark and I burst through the main doors of the asylum, gasping for breath. But the outside world didn't feel safe anymore. The asylum's presence lingered, as if it had followed us. We stood there, shaken and broken, unsure of what to do next. Mark collapsed onto the ground, his hand shaking. "Jacob is gone," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. I wanted to comfort him, but I knew the truth. We had barely escaped with our lives, and Jacob had paid the price. Just as we thought we were free, a low, guttural laugh echoed through the air. The figure from the asylum appeared once again, standing in the shadows of the trees. It had followed us, and it wasn't done with us yet. I grabbed Mark's arm, pulling him to his feet. "We need to go now!" But Mark didn't move. He stared at the figure, his eyes wide with terror. "It's not going to let us leave," he said, his voice hollow. "We're never getting out of here." The figure moved closer, its presence suffocating. I could feel the air growing colder, the darkness wrapping around us like a shroud. "It's over," Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. I looked into the figure's hollow eyes and knew he was right. The last thing I remember is the figure's cold hand reaching out toward me. There was no escape, no salvation. The ghosts of Black Hollow Asylum had claimed us, and there was nothing we could do to stop them. The darkness consumed us. As I faded into the void, I heard the whispers again, speaking of pain, suffering, and death. Black Hollow Asylum had taken our souls, and we were now part of its eternal nightmare. There was no escape, no end, only the darkness.
The story may have ended, but nightmares have a way of clinging to you, following you into the dark. Tonight, when the shadows lengthen and you feel that creeping dread, remember, some nightmares don't end when you wake up. If this story left you uneasy and you crave more terror, hit the like and subscribe button. The real nightmare is only just beginning.